All right, so today we're going to talk about compression. Compression is one of those things that tends to be a bit of a mystery to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that deals with a little bit of mathematics. Now, math, much like gravity, is one of my mortal nemesis, but we in times like this we can use it to our advantage. So compression is where we take a sound wave, mm-hmm. or several sound waves, and we set a threshold, and anything that goes over that threshold gets compressed. What does that mean, gets compressed? Basically, when you have the sound wave going up and down, you hit that point, it gets rounded off, so it can become a little softer. What we use there is a ratio. Now, this is your standard run-of-the-mill compressor limiter that Pro Tools provides. We're going to start with this one, then move on to something a little fancier.
Okay.
But it says here we have a ratio of 1.0 to 1. What happens when you have a ratio of 1 to 1?
You're usually even?
Yes. 1 to 1 means they're equal. Now, if we bump it up to, say, 6 to 1, what this means is that anything that crosses the threshold gets reduced, gets compressed at a ratio of 6 to 1. So if you go up by 6 decibels, that becomes 1 decibel louder than the threshold. If you go up 12 decibels, then it's still at a ratio of 6 to 1, so that becomes 2 decibels over the threshold. If you go over 18 decibels, you're probably doing something wrong with the recording.
Oh.
But in that case, it would be reduced to 3 decibels over the threshold. There's a lot of different applications for this. A lot of times you use this to control sounds, control levels, control how hard it's hitting the master fader. We can also use it to color sound, to emphasize things, to de-emphasize things. Let's take a look and just listen real quick. This is at a ratio of 1 to 1, so there's no compression being added. So that's just your straight drums going right through. We're going to go back up to 6 to 1, and let's hear what happens. No, 6 to 1, not 5.9. Yep. How did the sound change? What are you hearing?
It does sound soft. A bit more soft.
Does sound soft.
But a little uneven too.
Right. So this is not my first choice compressor for something like this. We're just putting this on all the drums. Let's try a little bit lower. And then you can see here in the diagram, as you move the ratio, it changes. We can also move the threshold, so we're only getting a certain number. So let's try 3 decibels. Keep it at the same threshold we started with, and hear how the sound changes. Let's bypass that here, just raw audio again. And hear the compressed audio again. So it's been reined in, it's been tightened up. I'm not a huge fan of how it's sounding though. Mm-hmm. It sounds too restrained. So I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to block that. I'm going to move on to a different compressor. Now this is Slate's FG Mu. It's based off of a variable Mu compressor, the Fairchild 667. That's one of those old school audio analog pieces of gear that, how do I put this? They're rare and they cost a whole lot of money. You can get one used, if you're lucky, for $50,000 to $60,000.
Whoa.
The plug-in costs a whole lot less. I'm a big fan of saving money, but not a fan of losing out on good analog sound. So this is a good emulator. The way this one works, slightly differently. is it has a set ratio, and you just move the threshold. You do that with the input switch, and then there's a threshold as well. So you can really hit it hard, or you can hit it softly. Let's just see how it sounds with just the basic settings. You can see on the meters here, it's just hitting it slightly. So it's just pulling in some of the peaks just a little bit. It still sounds nice and thick, it still sounds nice and clear, but it's really not being squashed. Listen again. So it adds a certain color of sound, it adds a lot. It kind of glues it all together. Now, when we raise the threshold, so it's hitting it a lot harder, what happens overall when we compress something and we lower the peaks of the signal? What can we then do with the overall signal?
Because we can increase the threshold. Could we do that?
Not the threshold. We can increase the volume.
The volume.
We can really boost the overall volume in our mix. Excuse me. And we can do this with the volume, or we can do it on the faders.
Oh.
Let's hear how that sounds. So this is just the plain audio. Now, it's important to remember when we're mixing, psychologically loud feels better. We don't want to just make it loud for the sake of making it loud. We want to do so with purpose. We want to make sure we're adjusting the audio with intention.
Okay.
So we've got a little bit here. I probably wouldn't boost it so much. You know, I'm exaggerating a few things just to really show what's going on. But we add a little bit of compression using the Fairchild emulator. We get a little more of a glued sound. We get just a little bit of the peaks reined in, a little more of a level signal. But we still have that kick, that punch, that oomph that we want from a good kick drum. This is a really good drummer playing right here. He's got a great sense of feel. I didn't do any edits on his actual playing. I'm just changing the EQ, changing the compression, changing the overall feel of the mix. Got that nice kick going, crisp hi-hats, and then the toms come in nicely. You can really glue the sound together. You can give it a nice flavor. You can also control it. Compression is a lot of things, but you've got control, you've got flavor, you've got the ratios, and do you want it too loud? Do you want, or not loud enough? You want it quieter? You can really pull things down. Any questions?
So how far can we increase the compression?
Let's find out. All right, so I'm going to jump back to this guy. So this has a ratio of 100 to 1.
Whoa.
So that means for every 100 decibels above the threshold, it gets reduced down to 1. Now, the odds of having any kind of signal that goes 100 decibels in variation, in dynamic range, not going to happen very often. If you were recording a gunshot, maybe, from quiet room to a gun going off, hopefully you're never going to record a gun in the studio. I hope that doesn't happen for you. But let's hear, so this is 100 to 1 on the ratio. Take it off. Let's just really crank the threshold. So you can make the signal almost disappear. why you'd need to compress it that heavily. I don't think you would really need to use it that crazily. Let's go back and really crank it through the variable mu.
Okay.
So let's put the threshold all the way up. And slowly bring it down. So there, we're still hitting it pretty hard. That's a heavier setting than I was using earlier. But it sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
It's thick, it's full life, everything's hitting nice and hard. Probably a little heavier than I would use it, but, you know, it's worth experimenting, it's worth listening, it's worth training your ears. Everything we do, when we do experiments like this, we say, like, what's going to happen if we crank it to the max? We're training our ears to hear the difference between really, really heavy compression, really, really light compression, medium, like all the way in between. I want you to experiment with this kind of stuff and train your ears. It's all about listening. Let's go ahead and we'll start at a low threshold and then just kind of gently bring it all the way to the top.
Okay.
So now you can see we're hitting the threshold really hard. So now we're just squashing it. And that's all the way squashed.
Oh.
But then we can balance it out. So we're bringing it back up to a similar level. Let's bypass that thing. And listen again. When dealing with compression on a track like this, because we have the entire drum kit going through it, what I listen for sometimes is what's being brought up that wasn't there before. Listen to the snare drum. So this is without compression. Get that snap. Tack, tack, tack. We add the compressor in. We're hearing the rattle of the snare drum. You're hitting it and you hear the vibration of the rattle underneath the snare of the snare drum.
Yeah.
Is that a sound we want for this mix?
No.
I don't think so. Of course, that gets into the subject of aesthetics, and it might work really well for experimental ambient snare shoegaze. I'm just pulling that out of thin air. I don't know if that even exists anymore or at all, but you know, there might be a time where you really want that squashed sound where you bring up all the extra noise, and you might not. For this kind of song, I wouldn't. Oop.
Ooh.
And always check the output signal. So there, it's compressed, it's coming together. You're still hearing plenty of impact on the drums. You're still hearing that snare crystal clear. You're hearing a little bit of that snare rumble underneath, but it adds some flavor. It sounds pretty good. Now, of course, we need to then put it in with all the other instruments. We need to see how it's going to sit in the mix. We might come back and revisit this. Might do a little more, might do a little less. It all depends on what we're hearing. It all depends on the choices we're going to make with the greater scheme of the mix to get it to sound good. Because if it doesn't sound good, we have to make it sound good. That's our job.
Yeah.
Any questions?
And with the threshold, would that also be decreased if we increase the compression? Or would that be opposite?
Threshold is where the compression kicks in.
Okay.
So anything above the threshold gets compressed. Anything below the threshold does not get compressed. So if you set the threshold really, really low, a lot of things are getting compressed. If you set it really, really high, only the stuff that's is peaking, the peaks of a sound wave are going to hit the threshold, and that's where it gets compressed.
Got it.
So threshold is where the ratio is how much. And then output is at the other end where you got it compressed and you can put more or put less.
Okay.
All right. Go compress something.
Awesome.